Good morning, everyone. Okay, so welcome to our webinar on how the Cyber Resiliency Act impacts DevOps culture. This is part of a series of webinars where we help guide companies through the European Cyber Resiliency Act and try to make it easier for them to comply with the Cyber Resiliency Act. So today's topic is how the CRA impacts DevOps culture. This is organized by the CRACY project, which is a European funded project in collaboration with a couple of different companies consisting of both engineers, software developers, and legal people in order to help companies comply with the CRA, with the upcoming CRA. So I am Merlijn Sebrechts, for those of us who speak Dutch. I'm a senior researcher at IMEC, and I teach at Ghent University. I teach a bunch of different courses like systems design and cloud computing. And I also work a lot on open source software and standardization. And as part of this project, we're also building open source tools to help companies comply with the CRA. So today I'll start with giving a quick refresher of what the CRA is specifically, because I'm assuming that for a lot of people, this is still a little bit of a gray field. Then I'll talk about the impact of the CRA requirements to DevOps, what the way forward is for companies that need to comply with the CRA, a few quick wins, and if we still have time, then we can do a short Q&A. So the first question is, why does the EU CRA exist? And the Cyber Resiliency Act, the goal is really to strengthen the cybersecurity of connected products in the European Union. This is for both software and devices. This is basically to solve the problem of the Internet of Insecure Things. There are so many insecure IoT devices that are actively being hacked and that are actively being used in order to then hack other devices. And this isn't just a problem because of criminal hackers, but in this day and age, these cybersecurity vulnerabilities are actually also being used by nation states in order to exert political pressure on their enemies. Moreover, this is not only an issue for the owners of the operators of these devices, but this is also a problem for the rest of the internet, because a lot of these devices, once they are hacked, they are then also actively used in order to hack other devices. And today, the largest distributed denial of service attacks are done by IoT botnets. So a whole bunch of IoT devices that have been hacked. You might not know it, but your smart fridge, your smart vacuum cleaner, any of the devices inside of your home might actually already be hacked and might be attacking other websites and other devices while we are speaking. So that is the point of the EU Cyber Resiliency Act. European Union lawmakers saw that this problem is not being solved quickly enough, so they created a mandatory requirement for minimum cyber security standards. So this is part of a new CE label. It is required for any product on the European Union market that is being sold from 2027 onwards. So what is it exactly? Well, first of all, it is a law that applies to any product with digital elements. This is a PDE. You will hear this term come back a lot when people talk about the CRA. This is software or hardware that can connect with another device to another device or network. And this network, this can be both the internet or an intranet or even a private connection between two devices. And this is both wired connections, wireless connections, infrared connections, even toys like Lego Mindstorms, for those of us who are a little bit older. Even those kind of toys are part of the EU CRA if they're still being sold in the European Union. The main requirements that manufacturers and importers have to comply to is that products need to be secure by design and by default. And you do this by starting with a risk analysis of the threats to your device or to your software. You're required to provide security updates for a minimum of 5 years or the product lifetime. You need to report any active exploit to ENISA and national cybersecurity bodies, and you need to report any major cybersecurity incident also to these bodies. You also need to be transparent about the software supply chain of your device or of your software itself. And so this is often done in the context of SBOMs. For those of you who are not yet privy to what an SBOM is specifically, an SBOM is a software bill of materials. It is a metadata document that describes your software and all the dependencies of your software. It explains the version of your software, the version of the dependencies, how it was compiled, where the dependencies come from, and things like that. It is in a metadata format that is standardized and that a lot of tools can then use in order to automatically search for known vulnerabilities in your software. And then the final main requirement is that you need to do a conformity assessment. For some products, you even need to get an external party to do a conformity assessment. There's a whole bunch of standards that are currently being developed that explain how you can create, how you can make your product conform to the EU CRA. This is just a highlight of the main requirements, but there are a lot more requirements. If you want to see all requirements, go to our website. We have the essential requirements document, which explains the essential requirements in my opinion, human readable language. Laws are sometimes a little bit difficult to read, but this really explains it in human readable language, what the requirements are specifically. And so, as you can see, this is important. These requirements are both legal and compliance requirements, but there's also very strict technical requirements. So any effort within a company in order to comply with the CRA will need to include both the legal side and the actual engineers creating the product. So what is the timeline of the CRA? So the most important dates are from September 2026 onwards. The vulnerability reporting requirements go into effect. So from September 2026 onwards, if you know of an active vulnerability being exploited in your product, or if you've had a major cybersecurity incident, you need to report this to the authorities. But then from December 2027, that is when full CRA compliance is mandatory for any product sold from that point onwards. So what does this have to do with DevOps culture? So I often like to cite Conway's Law. Organizations design systems that mirror their own communication structures. And so because the EU CRA requires secure by design products, the organizational structure of the teams that are building these products will also need to change. Your development culture will also need to change in order to be able to comply with the EU CRA. Having such stringent requirements is never just a technical problem. It's also not just a legal problem or a box ticking problem. You really need to change parts of your development culture in order to be able to comply in a way that makes it feasible and economically viable to comply. I think in practice, basically any company will be able to comply, but companies that do not have an adapted culture to compliance, they will spend a lot of energy in order to actually try to comply. So let me explain why that is. So the first requirement is security by design and by default. And so if we look at a regular DevOps culture, where developers and operations come together in a sort of cyclical process where you constantly improve and release new features. This is often associated with a move fast, fix later mentality, where you try to release code as quickly as possible. And if you see bugs, well, then you can always just release a new patch immediately and that bug is fixed. But the problem with the EU CRA is that security needs to be embedded both in the design and the development. You need to identify threats, you need to analyze and evaluate risks, you need to develop mitigation strategies. And so this means that security needs to be embedded in the DevOps culture. When we talk about security, you cannot just move fast and fix it later. The moment the product comes onto the market, it needs to be secure by default and secure by design. Thankfully, the DevOps ecosystem has actually already been working on a solution to this for quite some time. And this is called DevSecOps. This is basically DevOps, but in every single stage of this cycle, security is part of it. In every single stage of this cycle. So in the planning stage, for example, you do a quick threat modeling and an impact analysis of changes. In the build phase, you really start to look at automatic vulnerability scanning, composition analysis, automatic generation of software bills of materials, and things like that. In the testing phase, well, in the testing phase, most companies do some security testing, so there's often not that much that needs to change. And in the deployment phase, and the operation phase, and in the monitoring phase, again, security is part of it, part of DevSecOps. And so if you are a company doing DevOps, looking at the CRA and asking yourself, why or how can we actually comply with the CRA? Well, then look no further than DevSecOps. This is often called shift-left security, where the traditional security model is that security becomes a consideration during testing and deployment, whereas now security is shifted left to the planning, design, and development stages. So this seems as if there's a lot more heavy lifting that needs to be done before you actually develop the product. So does this mean that we're going back to the waterfall model? Do companies who are currently using the waterfall model, will they have an easier time complying with the CRA? And my answer to that is categorically no. If you are still using the waterfall model and you need to comply with the CRA, you will have a very bad time because of a whole bunch of additional requirements of the CRA in terms of incident response and security updates, because these are built on a foundation of agility and flexibility, which the waterfall model simply cannot give you. Reacting to incidents requires speed and flexibility, because it doesn't matter how much you shift into the planning phase. It doesn't matter how much analysis you do before your product gets onto the market, because all software is vulnerable. Any software that is currently on the market today will have a vulnerability in the future, or will have a vulnerability being discovered in the future. And when that vulnerability is found, speed and flexibility are essential and are required as part of the CRA. When you identify or get notified of a vulnerability, you need to notify the authorities within 24 hours. You need to release a detailed report within 72 hours. And in 14 days, the incident should be completely done, because you should have a final report explaining everything and explaining how you mitigated the vulnerability. The CRA also has the requirement for timely security updates throughout the project lifetime. What timely means is obviously a little bit of a gray zone. Part of this is a legal question, but part of it is also very clearly in the CRA that to investigate what timely means, you need to do an investigation into standards and best practices of your field of operation. And so what timely means will depend on the industry that you are in. But again, agile response is equally as important as secure by design. So we can't just do a shift left security model, because we also need a shift right security model. Security also needs to be part of the deployment and monitoring and maintenance phases, and you need agility there. So often when companies think about security, they think about a sort of trade-off between security and agility. And I'm not here to tell you that more security will make you more agile. I think we all know that if you need to include security into the entire DevOps lifecycle, some slowdowns are bound to happen. You will lose a little bit of agility in order to be able to add security. But this security is essential. It is a non-negotiable. You need to add it into your lifecycle. So how can we look at making this trade-off a little bit easier? Well, I have a cheat code for you. And that cheat code is automation. A lot of the technical requirements in the EU CRA are actually requirements that can be almost completely automated. Automation is a necessity for keeping the security by design process agile. For example, your CI/CD system is your reporting and compliance haven. For example, I talked about software bill of materials. Well, most CI/CD systems today already support automatic generation of software bill of materials. I talked about knowing when there is an actively exploited vulnerability in the wild. Well, most CI/CD systems already integrate with CVE databases and then link those vulnerabilities to your software automatically in order to figure out what are the vulnerabilities in your software. And then finally, VEX. VEX is a second metadata format that is not focused on the supply chain of your software, but that is focused on vulnerabilities specifically. And VEX is a great format, first of all, in order to communicate to your customers and the authorities about which vulnerabilities actually apply to your software. And it is also a very useful tool to interact with the providers of the libraries and software that you are using inside of your product in order to figure out what they are vulnerable to. And so all these things are incredibly easy to automate. Security scanning, incredibly easy to automate. And there's a whole bunch of open source projects out there which can really help you. When we're talking about software bill of materials, I would highly recommend to just look at CycloneDX. There are a bunch of other standards out there, but it's very, very clear that CycloneDX will be the main standard that every single system will support, even if they also support other standards. GitHub itself has integration into its CI/CD pipelines in order to generate, export, and share SBOMs and connect these to vulnerabilities. And if you want to go one step further, there's a lot of commercial software as a service offerings, such as Anchor, which really help you comply with these reporting requirements. Then When we talk about security updates, timely security updates, well, CI/CD systems really make security updates go fast. And then you have this nice side effect that might have a lot more business relevance of being able to also release regular features a lot more quickly. And then CI/CD embeds security and testing workflows, allowing you to streamline compliance without actually having to require like an internal security police officer that's constantly sending emails to everyone to ensure that they are following the security and compliance workflows. Now you can just build these into your CI/CD system and then maybe link these to things like SharePoint or other automation systems in order to actually also have the compliance and the legal side linked into it. And so when you look at this, it is very, very clear that there will be a significant incentive to PDE manufacturers in order to start adopting DevOps even more. Because DevOps will reduce the amount of effort that you need to do in order to comply with the CRA. So what are some quick wins? Well, I think the first thing that is required and that you should start with immediately is to create an inventory inside of your company of which PDEs you are putting onto the market. Then start with a single risk analysis. But at this point, you need to engage with the actual developers, an actual development team, in order to do this risk analysis. This cannot just be a legal risk analysis. This also needs to have a technical side to it. And so if you have a certain team and you know that that team is very enthusiastic about change and really likes to update their tools and procedures, then go to that team and make them the beta testers of your new processes. What's also important to start with now is to generate an SBOM for a single product. Because depending on which programming language you use and how you pull in dependencies, it will be easier or harder to get a complete SBOM. It's very, very easy to create an initial SBOM for your code itself, but then including all your dependencies in that might be more difficult. If you're using programming languages like Rust or Java, this will be a little bit easier because you have metadata that describes your dependencies. If you're using C or C++, that might be a little bit more difficult. And so you need to iteratively improve these tools. But first, you need to figure out where the gaps are by just trying them out. A great tip is to co-develop both processes and the platform itself. Because, as I said, you really need to lean heavily on this automation in order to get these requirements in order to be compliant with the CRA. And a great way to build these platforms is to use the paved road approach. This is sometimes also called the golden path. It's basically you have a set of great tools that work for a subset of your products that make it incredibly easy to be compliant, that make it incredibly easy for your engineers to do the right thing. And in this way, you are creating incentives for your other engineering teams that are not yet using this platform, that are not yet using these tools. You are creating incentives for them to actually start using these tools because their job will be easier once they can use the platform. And so either they will change their internal workflows in order to be able to fit into that platform that automates everything, or they will make some changes in the platform in order to make it so that their workflows actually fit into the platform itself. And so when you get started with CRA compliance tooling, again, get developers and CI/CD experts on board as quickly as possible, because they will really save your ass in terms of being able to comply with the CRA. A lot of these technical and reporting requirements are things that developers can really help you make that easy and simple. Start with a single product, automate the requirements for that single product, including software bill of materials and reporting, and then use this as a blueprint for your other products using the paved road approach. If you want to get more information about the CRA, so as part of the CRACY project, we can actually do some sort of free consulting with PDE manufacturers in order to help them figure out how they need to comply with the CRA. This is not this should not be seen as an alternative to your company going and talking with legal experts and figuring out how to do it internally, but we can really help your organization make this easier. Then, if you're more interested in how security and DevOps interact, then take a look at, for example, this ENISA guide for cybersecurity culture or team topologies for cybersecurity. Also, feel free to send me an email in order to keep in touch. You can also follow me on LinkedIn. We have a bunch of webinars planned out. In December, for example, we have a first webinar explaining what a software bill of materials is, giving an overview of all the tools of software bills of materials, and taking a look at how you can actually use these tools in your organization. If there are any questions, you can use the Q&A feature. I have maybe time for one question. I see my colleague Wiebe also sent the placeholder for the event in December in the chat. And we will also post about this on LinkedIn once we have more content in our page. All right, I see that there is no questions. I will need to go to my next meeting, and I will leave you to go to your next meeting. I hope that this was useful, and I hope that I can see you in one of the next webinars.